What happens when the people you trust become the source of your deepest fears? The bustling streets of Lagos were alive with energy, the sound of motorcycles weaving through traffic, and the smell of fried plantains filling the air. Outside, the city moved fast, vibrant and chaotic, but inside Lily's small, quiet home, the world felt different. The walls, once a place of safety, now seemed heavy with tension. Lily, just 12 years old, sat on the edge of the sofa, nervously picking at the hem of her dress. Her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't fully understand. She was a child, still innocent, yet something deep inside her sensed that things were about to change. Today wasn't an ordinary day, it was the day Uncle James was coming to stay. Lily barely knew him, having met him only a handful of times, but each encounter had left her uneasy. There was something about his presence that made her stomach twist in knots, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Her parents had spoken in hushed tones about his arrival, financial troubles, a failed business, but none of that mattered to Lily. What mattered was the strange, creeping feeling she had whenever she thought about him. When the front door creaked open and her father walked in, carrying Uncle James' suitcase, the uneasy feeling in her chest tightened. Uncle James followed close behind, his large frame filling the doorway. He greeted her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. As he stepped inside, Lily's heart sank further. The house felt smaller with him there, and she couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. The innocence of her childhood was slowly slipping away, replaced by a discomfort she wasn't ready to face. Lily's discomfort around Uncle James grew with each passing hour. His presence, though quiet and unassuming to her parents, felt heavy to her. She couldn't explain it, there was no outright reason to feel this way, but something about him made her skin crawl. At dinner, her father tried to make conversation with Uncle James, asking him about the long trip and how things were back home. Uncle James gave short, clipped answers, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced with something more subdued. He barely made eye contact, and when he did, it sent a shiver down Lily's spine. She kept her eyes on her plate, her appetite gone, her mind racing with thoughts she didn't fully understand. Every time Uncle James glanced her way, it felt like his gaze lingered a little too long, making her insides twist with unease. Her mother, always practical and focused on keeping the house in order, didn't seem to notice anything unusual. She moved around the kitchen, giving instructions to the housekeeper and setting the table, her mind elsewhere. Lily, on the other hand, was hyper-aware of everything, every sound, every movement. She noticed how Uncle James' hand would brush against her shoulder when he passed by, how he seemed to always be watching, even when he wasn't directly looking at her. Later that evening, her father suggested they watch a movie together as a family. It was something they rarely did, but tonight, it felt like an attempt to lighten the mood. Her mother agreed, perhaps hoping it would ease the tension that had settled in the room like a thick fog. They all sat together in the living room, but Lily couldn't relax. She chose a spot on the floor, close to the armrest, trying to put some distance between herself and Uncle James, who sat beside her father on the couch. As the movie played, she could feel his presence looming behind her. The room felt too small, too suffocating, and every small movement made her jump. At one point, she felt a light touch on her shoulder, so faint, she almost thought she imagined it. When she looked up, Uncle James' hand was resting on the back of the sofa, his fingers barely grazing her. His face remained neutral, eyes fixed on the screen, as if nothing had happened. But Lily's heart pounded in her chest, a cold shiver running down her spine. Her mother noticed the shift in her posture and, with a calm yet firm voice, called Lily to sit beside her on the couch. The invitation was a lifeline. Lily quickly moved, grateful for the escape, and sat close to her mother for the rest of the evening. Yet, even with the change in sitting, the unsettling feeling lingered, clouding her thoughts and making the once familiar home feel unfamiliar and unsafe. Lily's mind was filled with questions she couldn't answer, fears she didn't know how to voice. All she knew was that the man in her house, the one everyone trusted, was the source of her growing unease. If you want to know how Lily's story unfolds, hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more gripping stories like this one. The evening air hung heavy as Lily sat alone in the living room, her homework spread out before her. The soft glow of the lamp cast long shadows, and the distant sounds of Legos faded into the background. Her parents had stepped out for a community meeting, leaving her and Uncle James as the only ones in the house. She tried to focus on her studies, but an uneasy feeling gnawed at her. Footsteps approached softly from behind. Lily tensed as Uncle James entered the room. Still studying, he asked with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She nodded silently, keeping her gaze fixed on her notebook. He moved closer, pulling up a chair beside her. The proximity made her uncomfortable, but she didn't know how to ask him to give her space without seeming rude. "You've grown into such a smart young lady," he said, his voice smooth but with an undertone that unsettled her. "Your parents must be proud." "Thank you," she murmured, wishing the conversation would end. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. Uncle James reached out to point at a problem in her textbook. "Need help with this one?" he offered. His hand lingered near hers, and she instinctively pulled back. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I'm okay," Lily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel her heartbeat quickening, a sense of dread creeping in. He leaned in closer. "No need to be shy around me," he said softly. "We are family." The word family echoed in her mind, but it didn't bring comfort. Instead, it heightened her anxiety. She mustered the courage to stand up. "I think I'll continue studying in my room," she said, gathering her books. Before she could step away, Uncle James gently grasped her wrist. "Stay," he insisted, his grip firm. "It's nicer here in the living room, don't you think?" Lily's throat tightened. "I really should go," she managed to say, trying to pull free. His hold tightened just enough to make her eyes widen in fear. A tense moment passed. Then, as if realizing himself, Uncle James released her wrist and chuckled lightly. "You're right," he said. "Don't let me keep you from your studies." She didn't wait for another word. Clutching her books to her chest, Lily hurried out of the room and up the stairs to the safety of her bedroom. She closed the door firmly and leaned against it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The encounter left her shaken, a mix of confusion and fear swirling inside her. Questions flooded her mind. Was she overreacting? Did she imagine the shift in his demeanor? She wished she could talk to her parents, but something held her back, a fear that they wouldn't believe her or that she was misreading the situation. Lily sat on her bed, hugging her knees to her chest. The once comforting space of her room now felt tainted by uncertainty. She realized that things were changing, and not for the better. The trust she should have felt with family was overshadowed by a growing sense of unease. That night, sleep eluded her. Every creak of the house made her stutter, and the darkness seemed deeper than usual. She understood now that her instincts were warning her, and she couldn't ignore them any longer. The innocence of her childhood was slipping away, replaced by a reality she wasn't prepared to face. The days following the first incident with Uncle James weighed heavily on Lily. What had once been her safe haven, her home, now felt like a place filled with secrets and hidden fears. She carried the burden alone, unsure of what to do or who to tell. Her mind kept replaying the moment his grip tightened around her wrist, the way his eyes seemed different, colder. At the dinner table, she sat in silence, pushing food around her plate while her parents chatted with Uncle James as though nothing had changed. He laughed and joked with them, his voice steady and pleasant. But whenever his gaze shifted toward Lily, she could feel a dark tension bubbling underneath the surface. Each time their eyes met, she quickly looked away, her appetite gone. Her parents remained oblivious. They seemed grateful to have Uncle James around, treating him like part of the family, as though he were simply going through a rough patch. They never suspected the storm brewing inside their daughter. Lily's mother, busy with the daily routines of running the household, was especially focused on keeping everything in order. To her, Uncle James' presence was merely an adjustment they would get used to. Lily's world, however, was unraveling. She withdrew more each day, retreating into her room whenever possible. She avoided being in the same room with Uncle James, keeping her distance as much as she could. But no matter how hard she tried, there was always that uncomfortable feeling of being watched, of being vulnerable in her own home. She began to struggle at school. The focus she once had in her studies slipped, replaced by an ever-present anxiety that she couldn't shake. Teachers noticed her quietness, but she was good at hiding her distress behind a mask of politeness. Friends asked why she wasn't as talkative as usual, but Lily didn't have the words to explain. How could she tell them something she could barely admit to herself? The nights were the worst. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by nightmares where Uncle James' hand tightened around her wrist, trapping her in a grip she couldn't escape. She'd wake in a cold sweat, her heart racing, and lie in the dark, afraid to move. The shadows in her room seemed darker, longer, and every creak in the house made her jump. Her parents, absorbed in their own lives, never asked why Lily seemed different. They assumed she was just growing up, that maybe school was becoming harder, or perhaps she was simply tired. But Lily knew better. She was living in a world of fear and uncertainty, and it was becoming harder to keep the facade of normalcy intact. The worst part was the silence. Lily couldn't bring herself to talk about what had happened, not even to her closest friends. What if they didn't believe her? What if they thought she was overreacting? The fear of being doubted, or worse, dismissed, kept her quiet. She told herself it was safer this way, that maybe it was all in her head, and that everything would return to normal if she just ignored it. But deep down, she knew something fundamental had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same again. She began to feel isolated, trapped by the weight of her secret. The lively conversations she used to have with her parents were now hollow. Her laughter, once so easy, felt forced, if it came at all. Each day felt like a struggle to keep the pieces of her life from crumbling completely. Uncle James' presence was a constant reminder of the unease she couldn't shake. He continued to smile, to act as though nothing was wrong, but Lily could see through it now. There was something beneath the surface, something darker, and she was terrified of what might happen next. Lily had never felt so alone. The walls of her home, which had once been a place of comfort, now seemed to close in around her. She tried to hold on to the remnants of her childhood innocence, but with each passing day, they slipped further away. The weight of fear and silence was becoming too much to bear, and she had no idea how to escape it. Have you ever faced a situation where you felt trapped by fear and silence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As days turned into weeks, the unsettling encounters with Uncle James became more frequent. Each moment alone with him filled Lily with dread. His touches grew bolder, his comments more intrusive, always happening when her parents weren't around to see. It was subtle enough for no one else to notice, but for Lily, every interaction felt like a violation of her personal space and safety. Uncle James made sure to catch her in quiet moments, when she was alone in the kitchen, walking through the hallway, or even just sitting quietly with Max, her dog. Each time, he found a reason to be near her, brushing against her shoulder or offering a comment that seemed off, but hard to confront directly. The worst part was how normal he acted around her parents, as if nothing had changed. His friendly, almost cheerful demeanor with them only made Lily feel more isolated, as though she was the only one carrying the weight of this unspoken tension. She tried her best to avoid him, retreating to her room or staying outside with Maximum. But no matter how careful she was, Uncle James always seemed to find her. He would linger in doorways or corner her in empty rooms, his presence suffocating. Each encounter left her feeling more powerless, trapped in a cycle she couldn't break. Lily's silence became her only defense. She didn't know how to tell her parents what was happening, worried they might not believe her or brush it off as a misunderstanding. And so, she carried the burden alone, her fear growing with every passing day. The once vibrant and happy girl was fading, replaced by someone who walked on eggshells in her own home. Lily knew this wasn't how things were supposed to be, but she couldn't see a way out. Each day, the cycle repeated, and each day, she felt herself slipping further into a world of fear and silence. As Lily grew older, she became an expert at burying her feelings. The girl who once smiled freely now kept her emotions locked away, building walls around herself to keep the world at bay. Max, her loyal dog, became her silent confidant. He had been with her through everything, every tear she refused to shed in front of others, every night she lay awake, replaying the past in her mind. Max was the only one who saw the real Lily, the one who had been hurt deeply but never spoke of it. Max seemed to sense her pain in ways that no human ever could. He would quietly sit beside her during her darkest moments, nudging her hand with his nose, offering silent comfort when words were too hard to come by. His warm eyes followed her everywhere, as if understanding the weight she carried. There were times when she felt like Max was the only one who truly understood her, the only one who had seen every moment of her silent struggle. Max's presence was a lifeline for Lily. She had learned to smile and succeed on the outside, masking her pain with achievements and keeping busy. But it was Max who provided the emotional support that no one else could. On days when the walls she had built felt too strong to tear down, it was Max's simple act of lying beside her, his head resting gently on her lap, that kept her from feeling completely lost. But despite Max's constant companionship, Lily kept everyone else at arm's length. Her emotional walls were thick and unyielding, and she feared letting anyone see the vulnerable girl hidden behind them. Max remained her only comfort in a world that felt cold and distant. Then, everything changed when she met David. He was the first person to gently challenge the walls she had built, but even as she began to let him in, it was Max who stayed by her side, watching over her with quiet loyalty. David was different. He had a kindness that Lily hadn't encountered in years, a warmth that slowly melted through her carefully constructed barriers. At first, she resisted, hesitant to trust anyone with her heart. But David was patient. He never pushed her to share more than she was ready for, and with time, Lily found herself opening up to him in ways she never thought possible. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel hope, a glimpse of what life could be like without the weight of her past. With David, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could move forward. But that hope was shattered the day David died in a tragic accident. The news hit Lily like a punch to the gut, stealing the breath from her lungs. The man who had made her believe in love again, who had begun to heal the wounds inside her, was gone in an instant. Her world collapsed around her, and the emotional walls she had let down quickly rebuilt themselves, stronger than ever. Grief consumed her, but this time it was different. It wasn't just the loss of David, it was the loss of the future she had started to imagine with him. The life she had thought she could have was now out of reach, leaving her feeling more broken and alone than before. The walls that had once protected her now felt like a prison, trapping her in a place where hope no longer seemed possible. When David died, Lily's world shattered. She didn't know how to cope with the loss, and as her grief consumed her, she withdrew even further into herself. Max was the only constant in her life. As she lay in bed for days on end, unable to move, Max stayed with her. He curled up beside her, his warm body pressed against hers, offering a quiet strength that she clung to. In those dark, sleepless nights, when the weight of David's absence was unbearable, it was Max's steady breathing that kept her grounded. She talked to him as if he could understand her words, pouring out the grief she couldn't express to anyone else. "You're all I have left," she would whisper, her voice breaking under the pressure of her emotions. Max, in his quiet way, was her lifeline. But as her grief deepened, so did her dependence on Maximum. She began to blur the lines between her love for David and her bond with Max, projecting her need for connection onto him. It was no longer just about the comfort he provided, it was as if she needed Max to fill the void David had left. She would sit with him for hours, running her fingers through his fur, whispering David's name, imagining that Max was the only one who could keep her tied to the world. Max, always loyal, stayed by her side, but Lily's reliance on him became unhealthy. She stopped taking care of herself, convinced that as long as Max was there, she didn't need anyone else. Her relationship with Max, once a source of solace, turned into an emotional crutch that pushed her further away from reality. Each day, Lily slipped deeper into her own world, using Max as her shield against the unbearable truth of David's death. The more she clung to Max, the more isolated she became, trapped in a cycle of grief and dependence that she couldn't escape. She was losing herself, and though Max remained a faithful companion, even he couldn't pull her out of the emotional abyss she had fallen into. Lily, weakened by illness and years of emotional pain, knew she couldn't carry the burden alone anymore. Lying in the hospital bed, she realized that facing her past was the only way to move forward. When a kind pastor visited her room, she felt something stir inside, an urge to finally speak the truth. With trembling words, Lily confessed everything: the abuse, the twisted relationship with Max, and the overwhelming guilt that had consumed her for so long. The pastor listened patiently, offering no judgment, just compassion. For the first time, Lily felt the weight lifting off her chest. She had unburdened herself from the secrets that had haunted her. The pastor prayed for her healing and forgiveness, and though Lily had never put much faith in miracles, she felt a small flicker of hope ignite. It wasn't an instant cure, but it was the beginning of something new. Surrounded by support from the church community, Lily slowly started to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. She realized that her past no longer had to define her. With each passing day, she grew stronger, not just in body but in spirit, finding the courage to believe in a future beyond her pain. The road ahead would be long, but Lily now knew she didn't have to walk it alone. Lily's journey to healing wasn't easy, but it was real. Each day, she took small steps toward rebuilding her life. Surrounded by the support of her newfound community, she realized that hope wasn't lost, even in the darkest moments. The walls she had built around herself slowly came down, brick by brick, as she learned to trust again and reclaim her life. Her past still existed, but it no longer controlled her. Lily had found the strength to forgive herself, and in doing so, opened the door to a future filled with possibilities. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was beginning to truly live. Lily's story is a reminder that no matter how broken we feel, healing is possible. With the right support, anyone can find a way forward. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience and hope.